Good afternoon, everyone. This is Eric Toshelis. I am the Research Director for the Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative at Jobs for the Future. I am here with our Program Manager, Melanie Mulvey, and this is the Bidders Conference for the Request for Proposals. The title of that is the Student-Centered Learning Practices, Investigating the Outcomes for Underserved Student Populations. Our goal in today's work is to explain what the Research Collaborative is, to give you multiple details about the request for proposals, talk a little bit about the submission and selection process, and then we will take some questions and answers via the chat function that you'll see at that point in the WebEx interface. So thanks for making time today and welcome. A little bit about the Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative. We are an assembly of research teams, distinguished fellows made up of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers, and building and systems level leaders from around the country, primarily New England because our main funder is the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, and they are committed to educational advancement and equity here in the New England region. So we're made up of research teams, distinguished fellows, staff, partners, and funders, and our job is to catalyze, communicate, and connect in this complicated and noisy field. More specifically, the catalytic work that we do is to support groundbreaking research that builds the evidence base, helps us to understand how better to move the needle on issues of equity, and how to keep the field moving forward. There are lots of different sub-activities within that catalytic purpose. I'd be happy to get into those at further detail at some other point. But right now, suffice it to say that our job is to make sure that student-centered learning is relevant and responsive to the needs on the ground, and that the research questions that we're asking are actually helpful to those who are trying to seek systems change, rather than only end up in producing findings that go into journal articles. Consistent with that goal is the goal to communicate, and that means that we curate and disseminate for cross-sector audiences the best scholarship and the practices that will help bring student-centered approaches to scale. We're increasingly interested in taking those fantastic pockets of great innovation, those strong renditions in sort of ordinary places, and broadcasting and amplifying them widely so that more people can do what those rare pockets are able to accomplish. And lastly, connected to that one, is our need to connect. We bring leaders from research, practice, policy, and funding together twice annually and multiple times throughout the year virtually to reduce redundancy, to promote smart field growth, and to accelerate innovation in the field. We do this through collaborative meetings. We do this through webinars. We do this through collaborative produced documents. We do this by supporting various members to go to other convenings and other meetings. We're trying to, again, not just build the evidence base, but amplify and share it. So this is different than other RFPs in that we're not just supporting a research project, we're also supporting the infusion of researchers within a burgeoning research community that is held accountable to practice and procedure and policy on the ground. So the RFP in general, the goal is to, for this particular RFP, is to investigate the extent to which student-centered learning practices can be used to advance equity in public education. We're making a very concerted and consistent turn, you'll see throughout the RFP, to make sure that we're not just studying student-centered learning practices, but we're studying the impact of those practices on underserved populations. Theoretically, our sort of theory for change here is that student-centered practices are a potential strong equity play in the way that they're able to reach and teach marginalized populations in public school classrooms and in other learning environments. The research on that is mixed, if not thin, and so we're trying to use this RFP to help see the finer points about where student-centered learning can impact those populations, what strategies might need to be scaled up as a result, and what further questions will get raised as we investigate those things with rigor and know where to make the next commitments. We're funded primarily by the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. They have long been our anchor funder and our thought partner and our supporter through the genesis of the Research Collaborative and through today. They are funding 2 of the $400,000 pass-through studies in this grant opportunity. There is another funder that, depending on the nature of the questions and the populations that are being served, that other funder may join, and we may be able to add a 3rd research study. That depends on sort of what gets fielded and what we receive. And unfortunately, I don't really have any other details to share with you other than that. All of what we know and all of what we are looking for is characterized within the RFP, and we can refine those things in the FAQ that we'll submit or that we'll upload after this meeting. The proposals are due by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on June 4th, 2018, and there's a particular email address. The RC submit is the way that we're going to receive those. Oh, sorry. No, just got corrected by Melanie. We're doing that in an online form, and we'll have a release for that. My apologies. Yeah. So we're doing an online portal where you'll submit the basic fields. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and then you'll upload the documents that are needed. A quick point about eligibility. In the research, in the RFP, it states that we're looking for 501c3s or 509A1s or 2s, which are basically the federally designated nonprofit organizations, and we've got some questions about that. What about state universities and state colleges who technically don't fit under the 501c3 or the 509 or 2? And we definitely want to encourage state colleges and universities and even private colleges and universities, as long as they can substantiate their nonprofit status through appropriate documentation. And typically, we've done that before with other organizations. As long as you can make it clear that you're not a for-profit entity, and you have the research capacity to conduct this work, then you are eligible. If you have any finer questions about that, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll make sure we answer those. Those are the basic overarching goals of the RFP. A couple finer points on the research questions we're asking teams to entertain. It's a tripartite question here. The one is we're looking for measurable effects. In other words, we're looking for folks to study a specific approach and its effect on academic achievement, preparation for post-secondary education, and/or civic and career readiness on one or more of the marginalized populations that are identified in the RFP, or if you want to make an argument for a marginalized population that is not identified in the IEP, we would entertain those as well. We understand that term to be multiple definitions for how you would understand and then investigate marginalized. But in particular, we're looking for students who have a historical experience of being underserved by traditional methods and traditional institutions and traditional structures, which is why we're looking for student-centered approaches and the way that we can measure those effects on those populations. The second question is what contextual, institutional, cultural, interpersonal, epistemological, and/or procedural factors contribute to these outcomes. And we're casting the net widely here on purpose. We're worried and are trying to make sort of a claim here that if we're studying only those measurable effects in isolation, we're losing the larger forest for the trees here. It's important for you in your research to designing your research program is to think about how you account for the school culture, how you account for institutional changes over time, the way that teachers are prepared or not for particular approaches, interpersonal relationships between educators, kids, families, community, belief structures, and the way that that inform how things work, procedural factors and the way that the school might actually organize time and organize space, and maybe even legislation or district-wide reforms that would impact how this particular approach is being applied and then how it's carried out in practice. So we don't want to be blind to those facts because we know that they have a huge influence, and so we're looking for research designs that take those into consideration. And lastly, we want you to communicate what the implications of the study are for the field. How will it advance our learning? And by our, I really mean more than just researchers. How will it advance practitioners, policymakers, and school level and district level leaders thinking about this field and what's possible? And then also, how will it, what are the implications for the studied populations, the marginalized students in particular? What will it do for them, assuming that this thing that you have studied, if it has positive effects, could be ramped up and scaled elsewhere? What kind of effect could we expect to see, or might we hope to see if we can't go quite that far? So those are the three generalized questions we want people to entertain. Of course, we get into much more specifics in the RFP, and those specifics are likely most delineated both in the section of the RFP that describes the proposal guidelines, where the research framework, the research design, the projected outcomes and utility, capacity questions, how to address issues of equity, and your work plan and budget. You'll see lots of details there that will describe each one of those. But more specifically, I think some of the best places to look are the evaluation criteria. And what we supplied for you there is a table that is literally the exact same thing that we are going to use with our reviewers when we look through these proposals. And you'll see that there are weighted categories in each. I'm actually looking at it right now as I'm talking to you, and I recommend that you do the same if you have that up on your screen or have it next to you. It starts on page 20. The criteria for evaluation with research framework is really how are you kind of setting the stage for things, which parts of student-centered learning, which approaches, how are you addressing the questions, what is the existing scholarship that informs your particular take. I will say that in past, when we've received RFPs, we're currently finishing out the first cycle of the first 5 studies that we've supported. Some of the ones that did not make the cut last time indicated, or they didn't really step up to the plate as much as we would want them to, because it's clear that they didn't know the research that had already been done on those particular types of approaches, or the theories behind why those approaches might be successful or where there might be trouble spots. So we're really looking, even though we don't want you to be super exhaustive and writing pages and pages and pages of research lit review, we want you to make sure that you're hitting the right studies and have demonstrated that you know where the gaps in the research are and can make an argument from that. So that's a key part of the research framework. And then also making sure you understand what sort of contextual factors we should be paying attention to. With the research design, this gets down just to the nitty-gritty of the nuts and bolts of your methodology. We'd like to know about your sample. We'd like to know about your units of analysis, what measures you plan to use, and how you plan to analyze those, what effect sizes you expect to see, power analyses if they're appropriate, and then how you're going to establish acceptable levels of validity and reliability. Sort of standard stuff here. Again, really looking for high rigor designs so that we can then report these widely and be able to rise to a high level of expectation about the quality of the research, and then be able to communicate that to multiple audiences who will accept it when we know that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's. With the research, with a focus on equity, again, want to see a strong characterization throughout the research proposal that you're considering issues of marginalization, of minoritization, of oppression, of any othering that might happen in schools and institutions and communities, and how student-centered practices either participate in or can find some ways of controlling for or even superseding those factors would be a real strength in your design. Make sure that the significant portion of your sample consists of underserved learners so that you actually can make claims about those, the sample that you're seeking to affect. Make sure that there are mechanisms for substantively integrating students, families, practitioners, or other stakeholders in the administration of the study and in the analyses of the data. This has been a sticking point for other research teams in the past, where we really want to build in some responsiveness to the communities we're seeking to impact here, and so we need to see in the process of your research design that you have some member checks that are built in throughout the study, where you're checking in with local populations to see if the meaning that you're making of those data are the meaning that they would make of the data, and that that's consistent with what they might need out of those data. So good to see that those checks are included not just at the end, but potentially within the first year of the study and midway through the second year. And then, of course, that the implications of the study promise to bolster or inform efforts to enhance equity in the schools. For projected outcomes and utility, pretty standard stuff here. Just really want to make sure that you're generating or showing where the new knowledge will be or where the new implications will be. If you can, it's really helpful to show us what the necessary conditions for the successful implementation of that approach would be. Again, that's going back to the contextual factors. If you know that this would only work in a school that has a rare set of characteristics, that's going to be kind of less helpful for moving the field forward. If it's at a large comprehensive high school that's similar to many large comprehensive high schools, then that would be helping us to see what kind of conditions would help with successful implementation, and it might be more scalable for us. Lastly, we're really looking, because we're a research collaborative and we try to be responsive to the field, it's crucial that we have a list of field-friendly deliverables. And let me be just crystal clear on what we mean by that. We mean stuff that parents, teachers, administrators, legislators, and the general public would be able to access and read and not be so covered in jargon or inaccessible language that it would be pointless for them to even try. In other words, if it would be really good to write for a journal article, a peer-reviewed journal article, we're not going to call that a field-friendly deliverable. We're looking for infographics, blogs, interviews, op-ed pieces, animations, all sorts of different deliverables that will help to change the public conversation about what's possible in public education, and also how we can reach those for whom we have an education debt at this point. So be thinking about that. Again, you'd be part of a research collaborative, so we don't expect you to invent these things from scratch. Not only is JFF well positioned to be helpful in building those field-friendly deliverables, but you'll be part of a research collaborative surrounded by practitioners and policymakers that will help you refine those things as they move toward public release. So we know that research teams are often most prepared to talk and think and write for other researcher audiences. That's why we're bringing you into the collaborative, because we're seeking to help you do that work. So don't feel like you have to know how to do that from the beginning. We're here to support you. That's the benefit of being part of a research collaborative. For the capacity component, you'll see that it's weighted with 15 points there. We're looking at the capacity of the lead organization. Of course, the more that your organization or the people within your organization or your research team have a history of being able to do work like this in the past and can show that they've been able to do it, the better that will be. If you're within a large or partnering, it's good for us to know who your partnering organizations are and to submit letters indicating their willingness to partner with you. That will be crucial. We need to know who the PIs are and the key staff that would be part of that. Typically, it's also helpful to show the percentage of their time if they're part of a larger organization that will be dedicated to this project. I can tell you in the past that people have submitted large research projects with the PI only dedicating, 10, 12% of their time. That's usually a warning sign that the PI isn't really a PI. They're more functioning at kind of a meta level. We want to make sure that the people who are primarily responsible for the project are the people that are also really actively engaged in the project. So the percentage of time dedicated to that should match that kind of expectation. We also want to make sure that the research team possesses the requisite expertise and experiences of and our sophistication with identifying and understanding issues of inequity and marginalization, and provides evidence of members' ability and willingness to appropriately name and account for their researcher positionality. That is a new aspect of this RFP, and we believe it's to some extent putting a stake in the ground. I would refer you further up in the RFP. I believe it is on page, one second, scrolling. On page 14, where we ask two specific questions where we want each research team to characterize their capacity. The first question is, in what ways do your team members' backgrounds influence your research approach and design? For example, how do your racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and disability backgrounds influence the research questions that you would pose, the data collection tools you would employ, and the way that you would plan to interpret research findings? We're being really focused here and intensive in here because we are well aware of the fact that many of us know very well how to use the language of equity, who can use vague and sometimes vacuous terms to describe commitments to it, but may not have the diversity in our teams to be able to actually ask the right questions, field the right kinds of research methods on the ground, be able to interact with stakeholders in real life educational situations, and then be able to make the interpretive moves necessary to make sense of those powerful and politicized moves and interpretations of data. So we want to make sure that you know that we are looking for and that you can communicate how your team is prepared to do that work. The second question that we're asking there is, in what ways do you expect to encounter race, racism, ableism, discrimination, marginalization, and other forms of systemic oppression in your study, and what specific staffing and research design features prepare you to capture and interpret such phenomena with rigor and responsiveness? Again, we're looking to make sure that you're thinking ahead of how you expect to see marginalization in your data, in your design, and how student-centered learning practices would be hopefully not just participating in, but actually overcoming and helping to achieve greater outcomes, particularly for marginalized populations. So again, we want to make sure that your team can do this work, and that means you've got to be clear about the positionality of those that are on your team and the expertise that they bring to it, which is why we've weighted it as much as we have in the capacity and why we've articulated it so clearly in that section. Moving on to the other portions of capacity, just want to make sure that you have a management plan, that you have sufficient access to data and research participants. Again, if your letters from participant organizations or from districts or schools where you plan to work can indicate that they are willing, ready, and able to share those data with you on the front end rather than trying to secure that between the submission and being approved as a grantee, and when you actually go out, the more you can get those things before you start the study, the stronger your proposal will be. And then if you could acknowledge one or two key challenges that you might see, for example, some participants may drop out over the time or they may move districts, like what do you plan to do with those data? What do you plan to do in order to, get outreach and connection with community stakeholders to get member checks? Whatever the challenges you may foresee, please make sure that you're identifying those and providing some quick solutions. Again, we don't need paragraphs and paragraphs on this. We just need to know that you're thinking ahead and are ready to respond. Section 6 is about the work plan and the budget. Just want to see the work plan that's really realistic and organized and has a timeline that looks like it's achievable. Gantt charts are always helpful in that regard. A list of potential deliverables, including interim findings. I want to highlight that, interim findings. We are working in a research collaborative. We meet biannually, so we'll be meeting twice face-to-face in the first year and twice face-to-face in the second year of this two-year study. We would love to have interim findings at each one of those meetings. Sometimes those findings may not be so much about the data, they might be about the interpretive or methodological turns that you're taking as a result of being responsive on the ground, or what you're learning from stakeholders about how the design may need to be tweaked. Those are still findings that are helpful for the field, but we do expect not to wait for 2 years to hear from you about what you learned. We want to know what you're learning as you go along. So a list of those potential deliverables, how they might promise to inform key stakeholders about the efficacy of student-centered approaches as we go is a real key component in being part of a research collaborative. And then the budget, of course, as usual, that it's within the required range, that it's got the right allocations, that it's detailed and it's reasonable in its scope and allocations. One of the things we do like to see whenever you're working closely and relying upon practitioners in school-related settings, that they are either stipended or given some sort of inducement or help for the gift of their time and the gift of their expertise. So if and when possible and where appropriate, to not violate obvious concerns that might raise the level of IRB and scrutiny, but where it's possible, it's always good to reward our professionals that we work with in some sort of way that's commensurate with the kind of work that they do for us. So please consider doing that as part of your budget. That's that section. Just another couple of minutes. I've already mentioned several of these things here. Our first meeting is in October 10th through 12th. It will be in Providence, Rhode Island. If you are a grantee, end up being awarded as a grantee in this grant opportunity, please make sure that you have the time protected, because we will expect you to be there for the first 2-day meeting that will be, actually it's a 3-day meeting for the grantees. The first day is a public-facing research deliverables from the first phase of our research studies, and our distinguished fellows finishing up their first 2-year cycle. We'll also have all of the new research teams, all of the new distinguished fellows, and all of the new research projects that will be part of this convening. We'll have at least 200 people there. It'll be a big splashy, high publicity. When we think high value to your organization, we help often to publicize the good work that many universities, colleges, and research institutions are doing, so it's sort of a win-win. But do make sure that if you want to be a grantee, that you're at least 2 members, leading members of your team, are able to attend and actively participate, because we'll be asking you as a new research team to share with public audiences what your plan for your study is at that grantee meeting. Usually our meetings are in October and May every year. We usually move them around different cities in New England. The public meeting is once every 2 years, and then the other meetings are internal grantee, more workshop orientation, where the research teams are refining interpretations of their data, they're working on public-facing deliverables, they're working with our distinguished fellows on various embed potentialities there, and I'll talk about that in a second. So they're very workshop-oriented, not public-facing, although our funders often do attend because they like to know and they like to see the kind of work that you're doing in process. A quick mention about the Distinguished Fellows. Our Distinguished Fellows are, for the first cohort, made up of 9 cross-sector leaders, practice, policy, and research. The next cohort will be 6. We're dropping the number to make it a little bit more manageable for us, and frankly to make it an even number, because it's easier for us during group activities and our workshops to distribute them even when we have an even number across the board, so we're doing that. We're thinking that there's a possible, there's always a possibility of what we call embeds, and this has to be mutually beneficial for both the Distinguished Fellow and the research team. And I think if you talk to, and we'll get some testimonials about this, if you talk to any one of the research teams that worked with the embeds in this first cycle, there was some initial trepidation about, do we really want one of these leaders as part of our research team? Do we really need their input? You know, what would they really have to add? And the overwhelming response has been, whoa, had no idea how helpful it would be to have a superintendent, a principal, a leader of a series of charter schools, to have someone who's on a school board and is also serving in a leadership capacity for a large urban district. All these kinds of leaders who have long experiences in thinking about issues of research and application and student-centered learning practices, to be able to think through problems and solutions with the research teams about how to actually engage partners on the ground, how to translate various components for them, and then in some cases how to report those data in ways that are digestible and helpful for practitioners. The embeds were super valuable to the research teams. We didn't force them on groups. We made opportunities available. We provided exercises for people to locate where the help might happen, and then we provided funds to support travel for Distinguished Fellows to go to the research sites when research was being conducted or when the results of that research were being reported to stakeholders. And it's been a real value add for everyone involved. So we'll construct similar opportunities for the next wave of Distinguished Fellows and research teams, and we hope that you'll consider it. If in your process of writing your proposal, you think of possibilities for the way that you could see using one of the embeds, please feel free to mention that in one of your sections. The best place would probably be in capacity, where if you know that there's a weakness and you think there might be a possibility for a Distinguished Fellow to help with some of that, that would be a good place to note that in your proposal. Across the meetings, we're always in continuous cross-sector conversation of emerging findings and observations. Again, interim findings are really important for us, not just waiting for 2 years to know about the stuff. And then we're, again, very committed to field-friendly, public-facing communications kind of early and often and throughout. And we are well-positioned, and the Research Collaborative is structured to help you communicate those. The timeline is this. We're asking for letters of intent by May 8th. The letters of intent are a very light lift. We're doing that intentionally because we know that as we hit toward the end of the academic year, for many folks who are on an academic schedule, things start to open up a little bit after May 8th. So the letter of intent is light lift. The requirements for that are at the link that has been provided or will be provided, the letter of intent link.
It is on the website.
It is on the website. So the link is there. No surprises there. We want to know the title, the population served, the benefits, and then any of your partner organizations. And really the reason we're doing that is that helps us to know how many reviewers we are going to need and what expertise among our whole panoply of reviewers that we could choose from that we'll also need. So once we get those letters of intent, that's then busy work for us behind the scenes to make sure we have the right procedures in place to do a real fair and thorough review of all of the proposals. They're submitted. We need those submitted again, I think, by 5 o'clock ET on June 4th. And then we'll use those intervening weeks in June to review those. A peek behind the scenes here, we pull from our advisors, we pull from our distinguished fellows, we pull from JFF staff, and we pull from the expertise at our various funders. And we also pull from some outside friends of the research collaborative, PhD researcher types, to help us review using the criteria that are delineated in the criteria for evaluation starting on page 20 of the RFP. We actually commit that to a digital form, and then we meet multiple times to discuss, then we rank, and then we re-rank until we end up with a set of finalists. Then late in June and in the first week of July, yes, that goes over the July 4th week, or the holiday there is what it is. There's no way around it. But don't expect that we're going to communicate with you on the 4th, but before and after, for those that are finalists, we do expect to communicate with you then, and we may ask for you to respond in an email to give you us direct answers to some specific questions we may have about finalist proposals. And then we meet one more time with our reviewers and make final decisions, and then we'll announce those on July 25th. So one request would be, if you are submitting a proposal, regardless of whether people on your team are on vacation over the summer, please make sure that someone is responding and checking emails between June 25th and July 6th, because if you are a finalist, we will likely have some questions for you during those weeks. Yes. So, great. Say again? Barring July 4th. Of course, we are skipping July 4th because we know that you'll be having lemonade and fireworks at that point somewhere. All right. What's next for us? We will be recording, we are recording this, and we'll be uploading the slides and posting it to the RFP site, which is at the sclresearchcollab.org/request-for-proposals site there. You can see the link on the page. We'll also be uploading the frequently asked questions document, and we'll be updating that on occasion too. If a question comes in, rather than just responding solely to that particular person's or that particular team's question, we'd like to try to make sure that everyone gets that. So up until the point at which you submit, I recommend checking the FAQ just to make sure you're catching any new things that might be there. We'll be posting that to the RFP site. Again, need a letter of intent from anyone that's intending to submit by midnight on May 8th, 2018. That's coming up pretty quick here. We need those, again, in order to get our work done behind the scenes. With that, I'd love to field some questions from you all. If you could type your question into the chat box on the right side, lower right-hand side of the screen there. Melanie and I will be fielding those questions and trying to answer them quickly. So here's one. We are not a research organization, but we have capacity to conduct high-quality research with field-friendly communication. Are we eligible to be the lead organization? I would again say, yes, you are, as long as you could substantiate your nonprofit status, then yes. If not, you may need to partner with another organization that would be the lead and that you would be a partner in that organization. If that answers your question, I hope that it does. Next question is, the RFP seems to lead towards school-based interventions and programs. Would studies that examine out-of-school interventions like youth organizing groups and youth leadership councils be eligible? The short answer to that question is, for this RFP, no. We really are focused on school-based interventions, particularly at the middle and high school levels. So we really do want to see what's happening in schools about this. Our previous RFP was more open to other learning environments, including after school. And for this one, we narrowed it a bit because we're really interested in the kinds of outcomes we can support for marginalized student populations within traditionally structured public school settings. So not this round, perhaps the next round. Thank you for asking. Another question, you mentioned compensation for students. Were you talking about youth participants or graduate student members of the research team? So, yeah, compensation for subjects of the research gets really tricky, as you all know, with IRB. So whatever is okay with IRB would be okay with us. If you're talking about bringing on students as part of your research teams and they are active parts of your meaning making or the research design, or they're part of the group that's analyzing the data and then thinking through findings, then to me that sounds like they're members of the research team, and I would hope that there's some form of compensation there. The line that needs to be established, again, it gets a little fuzzy with IRB depending on how you're understanding inducements and stuff, but IRB can be really helpful there. But compensation for student participants is often a sticky area, not so much if they're part of your research team. I hope that answers your question. Next one is, the first research question is just a quasi-experimental or experimental design with a pre-intervention period. But just to clarify, are we looking for research to examine effects of existing student-centered learning approaches on marginalized student populations already taking place in schools or school districts, or are we looking for research to examine effects on student-centered approaches on marginalized student populations that would be new? In other words, a new intervention that you're trying, and so part of the grant funds would be used to fund the new intervention. The answer to both is yes to both of those. Both of those are possibilities. The caution, I would say, is in if you are planning a new intervention and this is to test a proprietary model or something that an organization has developed and is selling and is already, kind of out there in the world, and you want to use this as a way to get some validity and reliability numbers, that's probably going to be getting a little bit too close to really kind of more of a less research and more trying to establish, market stronghold place for a particular intervention. So what I would like to encourage you all to think about is if you're going to track an intervention, that the intervention is something that has value to the field and will be readily accessible and scalable across the field without people having to pay for it to use it. We're really interested in having something be useful to the field that is accessible and has no barriers. So if it's an intervention that you'd like to test that doesn't come with that, then awesome. If it's something that is already existing in schools and it's something you want to go test that people are already trying and see what kind of effect that has, that is also a fantastic form of inquiry that we'd love to support. So again, hope that answers the question. If not, let us know. Do you have a minimum percentage of racial ethnic diversity in the expected sample that you will use as a cutoff to consider proposal? If so, can you give us a ballpark of what a minimum percentage would be? I don't. I'm not able to give a number. If your research design would be assisted by doing a power analysis, it would help to think about what would happen if you were to have a certain number of students who were to drop out of the study. Would you still have enough of that population in order to be able to make some claims? I really don't, I'm hazard to even say, oh, just make sure it's above X percentage, because it really depends on your research design, and it depends on the kinds of claims you want to be able to make about those numbers. So no doubt, the more the merrier. No doubt, the greater attention that you have to what can happen when students are not able to fully participate over the scope of the research and account for that in the way that you analyze your data, that also will be huge. But I don't think I want to give a percentage here other than to say, a bigger number is better than a smaller number. I know that's vague, but it really depends on the research design. What do you see as the primary difference in focus for the current RFP and that was 2 years ago? Lots of similarities that are noted here. Is the focus on equity the main difference? Yes, the focus on marginalized populations is the main difference, and the focus solely on secondary level schools is the main difference. We're also not restricted to New England as a site here. For our last study, we really wanted most of our studies to be in New England. In this case, anywhere in the 50 states works for us. We're really interested in reaching, again, marginalized populations, so wherever you think the site would best fit your research design and where you have access and data sharing agreements, that works for us. There is no preference for organizations in New England. We will give preference to that for our distinguished fellows for sure, but for the research that we're supporting here, we've worked with our funders and understood now that I think it's better for the field to be really casting the net widely, which includes states outside of New England. So please consider all 50 states as being eligible spots for, to conduct this research. If the research includes a school intervention, can the associated resources be included in the budget? I'm trying to figure out what that means. If the research includes a school intervention, can the associated resources, I'm assuming that means the resources needed to support that intervention, so I'm turning the gears in my head. You can't see me staring up at above my readers at the ceiling right now, but the long and short, if you can find a way to use grant resources and still conduct a rigorous analysis and use some grant resources in order to support the intervention itself, i.e. printing costs, administration costs, staff support, stipends for those who might be administering if that's appropriate in your design, then that's a reasonable expectation for the cost. If you're building out a new software platform and you're having to do all the coding and stuff to create sort of I can imagine that's going to get pretty expensive and create a pretty big dent in the size of your budget. Again, this is a research proposal, so we're very, very interested in supporting studies of impact on marginalized populations. If you can make an argument that this intervention and the supports of that intervention will do that, and your research design is tight enough around those questions and around those equitable, focuses that we're trying to create here, the foci that we're creating here, then for sure find ways to put that in your budget. But, I would make sure that it's a small component of your budget. The majority of this should really be going toward data analysis, site preparation, whatever levels of investigation you're going to need in order to come up with the best answers. So again, apologies for being vague there. This is sort of, it depends on your research design question, but in general, if it's an intervention you're proposing, that's awesome as long as it's freely accessible for everyone, and as long as most of the budget isn't going toward the creation of that intervention, it's going toward the studying of the effects of that intervention. Does the PI need to be on staff at the applicant organization, or can the PI be at a partner organization? Co-PIs are great. That to us shows that if it's, for example, a research practice partnership and you're working really closely with someone on the ground, that's great. As long as the PI has the research chops to be able to conduct the analyses. A primary investigator must be that, someone who understands the ins and outs of research design and qualitative and or quantitative methodologies. So yes, but the caveat being, they've got to have the researcher chops. What grade levels? So our funders are focused on the secondary level, and by secondary we mean middle school on up. We would invite proposals that would focus on middle school populations as long as the research questions being entertained and the interventions or the practices being studied have a direct line to the high school transition and to college, career, and civic preparedness, which are the core activities of Jobs for the Future and some of the core concerns of our funders. So for sure, middle school is okay. High school for sure is okay. Again, making sure that we're keeping an eye on equitable outcomes for students that prepare them for flourishing lives and flourishing careers and flourishing post-secondary high school or college or career readiness. If the winners are announced in late July, would projects begin in August or September 1st? We would hope to be able to, if we're going to announce in late July, that we would hope to get MOUs and contracts through and done, I would hope by mid, if not the third week of August, which would prepare you to be able to anchor and get some things done and ready to go in the fall. We're trying to announce this. We moved up in this RFP the announcement of it. We moved up the bidders conference. We moved up the submission date in order to allow for enough time over the summer. We would hope that as soon as our research teams are told that they're a grantee, that they could begin to make those phone conversations and set up the meetings, and that behind the scenes we'll be finalizing the MOU and the contract and get those out as soon as possible, so that before school starts, again, for many that's in the last week of August, first week of September, you'll be ready to hit the ground running. That's the plan. That's a tight turnaround, so we're hoping people will be responsive then. We definitely will be. Is there a screening between the letter of inquiry and the proposal submission, or should everyone plan on both? There is no screening between the LOI and the proposal submission. The LOI is, again, designed for us to make sure that we have the proper reviewers on hand. And then, yeah, we could, I'm thinking right now, let me say this. If someone is proposing, to study, I don't know, something that's way off target and doesn't seem to match exactly what we're looking for, and it's pretty clear from the LOI that this is probably not in the wheelhouse, we'll likely reach out to those people that have submitted to give them a heads up that they're pretty far off target here. And, full self-disclosure, for the last submission, we did receive a few proposals that they seemed that they were cut from another proposal and were just sort of thrown at this one, and those didn't get very far in the procedure. As you all know, this is a competitive process, and there will be some really strong proposals that we expect to receive. So please make sure that if you're going to submit to this one, that this is really submitting to our goal and submitting to our question and submitting to student-centered learning, and it's really, committed to the populations we seek to serve. We'll let you know if we think you're way off base at the LOI. Another question, for measurable outcomes, are you concerned about test scores, or are you open to measures that may be less biased for diverse populations? We're not just open to measures for that may be less biased for diverse populations. We are actively seeking those measures. In fact, of course, test scores do have some predictability as long as we can, account for their race, class, gender, linguistic bias that's often written into those measures. So any way that you plan to measure social emotional factors, student experiences, school climate, experiences of agency, engagement, level of relationships with peers and with teachers and with curriculum and with school, any one of those measures, if they fit with your research design, they fit with your research questions, and they fit with being able to identify issues of equity, then yes, please do that. Where you can show that those instruments that you're using have previously established levels of validity and reliability, all the better. Where you can show that those measures directly relate to specific aspects that we're concerned about in this RFP, also all the better. So yes, we definitely welcome that, and we encourage that, again, highlighting the rigor necessary to make sure that those work. Do you happen to care to offer suggestions about researchers who might be particularly interested in competency ed or culturally responsive ed? I mean, yeah. I mean, I have my favorites, but if I were to start naming favorites, I'd immediately be forgetting like the 10 or 15 other rad researchers and thinkers out there who have also led efforts. So it would just be like Eric's version or Melanie's version of who those people would be. And so, yeah, I don't feel like I want to give a name of favorites on this call. Instead, what I would encourage you to do is look at the resources that we have supplied in the references at the bottom of the RFP, and then look at the folks that those folks cite and sort of follow that crumb trail to find those. I would also look at potentially some of the people who have been award-winning researchers in these areas that maybe AERA has recognized, or the National Association for Multicultural Education, who they have recognized. If there are psychometricians out there who are particularly adept at thinking through issues of equity and they have published work in that regard, I'd hunt those folks down. Lots of different ways to kind of go down that rabbit hole and find some of those favorites there, and we all have our favorite list of folks, so I would encourage you to do that. If you end up finding none and you're still at a loss, maybe send us an email through RC Submit, and we can see if we can figure out if we have some connections. But do your homework first and let me know what you found, and then we can see who we might suggest. Thanks for asking, though. Are there any successful sample proposals that we can access? We're not at liberty to kind of share those. I don't have permissions from the previous research teams to do that. We hadn't planned on doing that. Plus, the previous submissions had a different set of criteria, a different weightings of those criteria, and a different focus. So I'd actually be afraid that those exemplars would steer people in the wrong direction. So I'm going to say no to that one, and again, refer you to the fact that we have bidders, an LOI process, filtering process to get to the finalists. We'll be communicating with those finalists, getting some feedback from them, and then finalizing. So there's multiple endpoints here in order to tweak and make sure that we're getting the best research at the end. But thank you for asking. Another question here, to measure effectiveness or impact, is there a preference for quantitative methods, or would a rigorous qualitative study be competitive? We are methodologically agnostic. Please feel free to argue for whatever methods will best answer your questions and would most meet the goals of this grant opportunity. So we're happy with the quantity stuff, super happy with the qualitative stuff, whatever best answers your question. Next question. Melanie is just highlighting for me, if you would like to see the winning studies and the abstracts for those studies for the last Research Collaborative cycle, those are all on the SCL Research Collab site. I believe you can follow the links to research on the side there, and it will take you to the current studies. The abstracts are there, and very soon you're going to start to see some public-facing deliverables from those studies about their interim and their final findings, all of which will be revealed at the October meeting that finalists or that grantees will be present at, so you actually get a chance to meet them at that point. But for current purposes, if you'd like to drill in a little bit to what studies were awarded in the last go-round, definitely check the ones that are on the website now. Any other questions? And I'm going to take this moment to get a swig of water. 1 second. Okay. I'll give another 30 seconds here for folks to type in any questions if they would like to have them answered. And if there are none, then I will again reiterate that we're really excited about this research opportunity. We're really grateful for the support from the Nellie Mae Education Foundation and potentially this other funder that may come on. And we're really excited to include a new set of research studies in our research collaborative and help advance the field. Again, want to underscore the fact that we are really trying to push the needle on equity here. So as you're writing about this, as you're thinking about this, as you're fielding your team, make sure that you're paying attention to the extent to which the questions you're asking, the data that you're gathering, who your participants are, and the implications that you're hoping to see from your study are really helping move the field forward and how we best meet the needs of kids whose needs have not been met previously with traditional methods. We thank you for your time. If for some reason you have any follow-up questions after the FAQ, please feel free to submit them versus right here at the rcsubmit@jff.org. That is the best way to put a question into the field. And what we will likely do, if it's a question that others should probably see, we'll post that on the FAQ and update that as we go along. Thank you all again for attending, and we look forward to seeing your LOIs on May 8th and your final proposals on June 4th. Right on. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.